Melatonin has been shown to be a very potent antioxidant, more powerful than vitamin C, more powerful than glutathione, which is very popularly known as the body's most powerful antioxidant. So if we know that, and we have family members or friends that have certain conditions where they have high levels of oxidative stress, autoimmune conditions, I think it could be a very valuable adjunct to add in to supplement with, because we know that, like most hormones, they decline as we age.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Danny Bossa Podcast. I'm joined today with a good friend of mine, Robbie Bennett from Dublin, Ireland. He's a functional nutrition practitioner, a strength coach, and personal trainer. He's also an expert in digestive issues, metabolic issues, food sensitivities, optimizing hormones, nutrition, and training. And he's actually a close friend and protege of our very good friend, Dr. Eric Serrano. How you doing, Robbie?
Yeah, I'm doing very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on, Danny.
Cool. So Andrew Huberman was on Joe Rogan not all that long ago discussing why he does not recommend using melatonin, and swaths of people stopped using the stuff. He made mention that it should not be used for anybody under the age, I believe it was 18, because it can stop the effects of puberty. And also the fact that supplements in general could be severely underdosed or overdosed, that the pineal gland only makes about 3 milligrams, and going over that is potentially not recommended. So you've got a little bit of a different opinion on a couple of the things he mentioned. So what would you like to start with here?
Yeah, so first off, I listened to the podcast where he mentioned that, and firstly, like, nothing should be said in absolutes. So you can't say, I don't recommend melatonin for any person, or I recommend it for every person. It's going to be context specific. So that's the first thing. Secondly, when we look at melatonin, if anyone is going to supplement with it, they need to go, okay, well, what is the objective, or what's the result I'm looking for from supplementing with melatonin? And we need to look at the cost benefit analysis. So when we look at melatonin and how it compares to other supplements or other drugs, let's use caffeine, for instance, because it's like the most widely consumed drug on the planet. There is a therapeutic dose of caffeine. If you wake up in the morning, you're quite sleepy, you take some caffeine, it has a therapeutic effect. If I give you 10 cups of coffee a day, I could see you in the emergency room because you've got far too much levels of caffeine in your system. So when we look at melatonin and we look at the side effects of melatonin, if we potentially overdose on it, if I decide to give you a gram, 2-3 grams, the worst side effects that someone is going to have is potentially drowsiness, headaches, maybe dizziness, that all cease with supplementation. So that's literally worst case scenario. Some people argue that you can drown in water. You can't overdose on melatonin. There is no dose where it has an LD, let's say 50. So that's the first thing. It is quite a safe supplement. Now, when we use melatonin, we do produce it endogenously inside of our bodies. We produce it in 3 places mainly. One, our pineal gland, where we roughly, I think it's 95% of circulating or serum melatonin comes from our pineal gland. We have some more melatonin in our gut. And that, I think the statistic is we produce 400 times more melatonin in our gut than we do in our pineal gland. So that's a pretty interesting one. And okay, why might that be? So it might have some antioxidant activity in our gut, because we know our gut bugs, are going to be fermenting and making different compounds and materials. And then lastly, which is not as commonly known, we actually produce melatonin in the mitochondria of our cells.
So is there a difference between the melatonin that is made in the pineal gland, or the function of it, versus the melatonin that's made directly in the mitochondria?
So this is a really cool one, because we've known about pineal melatonin for quite a long time. When we look at mitochondrial melatonin, it's quite a new concept. So with pineal melatonin, it has a circadian rhythm. So we generally have the highest secretions of pineal melatonin in darkness hours, and then at morning time we have its lowest production. So it has that cycle. When it comes to mitochondrial or intracellular melatonin, it doesn't have that circadian rhythm. And weirdly enough, we actually produce mitochondrial melatonin via UVB radiation. So if we go out and we get sunlight exposure, we know many benefits of sunlight exposure, like let's say vitamin D, for instance. Well, we actually produce melatonin because of sunlight exposure, which I thought was crazy because most people associate it with being dark sleep hormone, which it is, but it has much more benefits than that. So any melatonin we produce in the mitochondria does not leave that tissue, and that has a potent antioxidant or free radical scavenging activity in that tissue. Melatonin from the pineal gland goes through systemic circulation and throughout the body to various other tissues. So that's the main difference. So that, I thought that was pretty cool once I learned that. Now, we should be familiar with our circadian rhythms, our body's sleep and wake cycles. So we generally have cortisol, which is our awake, our energizing hormone, our stress hormone, sometimes people call it, or sometimes it's our response to stress hormone. We produce that in the mornings, or we should produce that in the mornings. And in the evenings, as it gets a bit more dark, we should be producing melatonin in our bodies. And I think the amount that we produce naturally is around 0.5 to maybe milligram in the pineal gland.
Okay.
Now, as we age, the ability to produce melatonin in the pineal gland decreases. And with that, we can associate decreases of melatonin with aging and increased oxidative stress on the body. So melatonin has been shown to be a very potent antioxidant, more powerful than vitamin C, more powerful than glutathione, which is very popularly known as the body's most powerful antioxidant. So if we know that, and we have family members or friends that have certain conditions where they have high levels of oxidative stress, autoimmune conditions, I think it could be a very valuable adjunct to add in to supplement with, because we know that, like most hormones, they decline as we age.
And it's not just a lot of people out there take melatonin basically for sleep. And not realizing that antioxidant property. I have a couple of friends of mine that take it strictly due to anti-cancer properties. They're like, I've slept well. I was sleeping just fine before I started taking melatonin, but I'm taking it because I'm genetically predisposed to getting cancer. My grandparents had cancer, my uncles, my aunts, and whatever else. Is there a fear for the production of melatonin getting, suppressed, kind of like we get with testosterone replacement therapy by taking larger amounts, or if you want to call it super physiological levels of melatonin, or is that kind of a moot point?
Yeah, so that was interesting when I kind of start digging into the literature on that one. And unlike testosterone or sex hormones, we have a negative feedback loop. So if I decide to take exogenous testosterone or outside testosterone injected into my body, there is that negative feedback loop. But sometimes with people that are hypogonadal, it doesn't really matter if we shut down endogenous production, because we want that super physiological or above normal levels of it. Now, when it comes to melatonin, there is no negative feedback loop to the pineal gland. Now, saying that, if I decide to take, let's say, 5 milligrams today, and I take it for 2, 3, 4 weeks, there will be, let's say, receptor downregulation, or let's say receptor insensitivity. You're not going to get the same effects that you would, let's say, week 1 that you will get in week 6 or week 8 and so on. So if an individual, let's say under the age of 30, is traveling time zones and wants to take melatonin to, let's say, to adjust their circadian rhythm to a different time zone, I think using it acutely can be quite beneficial. And then if you're, let's say, above the age of 45, I think sustained use starts to become more and more important every year, really, after the age of 45, in my opinion, because we know that we have calcification of the pineal gland, our levels drop, and like most hormones, that association of declining hormones are generally associated with increases of all-cause mortality and decreases in quality of life.
Okay. And could it cause, Huberman was mentioning that it was stopping the action of puberty or preventing puberty. For an adult to start jacking up their levels, could it have any issues on, androgen receptors or whatnot? Could it have, that type of effect at all? Or once you've had puberty, taking a melatonin at whatever level you want won't really have that type of impact?
So again, it comes back to the very first thing I said. It's context specific. What happens if I have a 10-year-old child that's a pre-diabetic and morbidly obese, and they've got, they've got issues there with nutrition and metabolic issues. So melatonin may actually be beneficial in certain situations because they've got, or in PCOS and high levels of oxidative stress. So I don't think it's a case of saying, oh no, if you've got a prepubescent child, they shouldn't take it, or they should take it. I think, again, it comes back to context specific. Now, I think there is some literature talking about how melatonin does delay puberty. But again, I don't, when you've got a young, healthy child, I think for most part, you should be trying to optimize endogenous production. Because I think who on earth is going to give a kid, I'm going to refer it back to testosterone. You're not going to give a hypogonadal 15-year-old testosterone. You're going to try and optimize lifestyle, nutrition, and so on before you turn to that route, for the most part.
Right.
So I think the same goes for melatonin.
And how would one determine, he made mention again, I stated at the beginning, that the supplements that you buy, in your typical health food store can be significantly underdosed or overdosed. So what is there a dose, like if it was prescribed and it was a pharmaceutical grade, very specific dose of melatonin, is there an amount that's required? And how do you determine if you're taking enough? Is it just dose dependent, or do you go by serum levels, or do you go by effects or how you feel?
Okay. So first off, when it comes to serum levels and so on, I'm actually not too familiar with melatonin in the serum, because really that would be pretty impractical to wake up in the middle of the night and draw blood. So I know you can test it into saliva, but I still think that's impractical. The only test that I'm aware of, and I do use myself, is the Dutch test. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah. So the Dutch test, droid testing of urine hormones. So Dutch is droid urine testing of complete hormones, and that looks at your melatonin over the course of the night, because when you wake up, you take a sample first thing in the morning, and that should be representative of your melatonin levels during the night. So I like that because I think that's quite practical, not very invasive test to do. And with the Dutch test, it's testing just more than melatonin. So it's also looking at your cortisol response in the morning, test your testosterone and DHEA and other hormones there, as well as some organic acids like B12 markers, glutathione markers, and so on. So it gives you a full picture of kind of what's going on there as well.
Well, then would everyone have to do a Dutch test just to kind of dial in the amount of melatonin they should be taking? Is that kind of the only way around it?
Oh, well, that goes back to, so why would you be taking melatonin? Is it because you have sleep issues, or is it because you're trying to get the beneficial effects of the antioxidant effects from it?
Yeah, let's say you were mentioning someone over 40. So I'll be 49 in February. So I decide, okay, I'm listening to you. You make a compelling argument. I should be taking melatonin. So how do I determine how much melatonin I should be taking?
That's a tough one, because really when we look at the research, one of the professors that's really ahead of the curve, I feel, when it comes to this, is a man of the name of Russell J. Ryder. And he pretty much says, he doesn't tell everyone to take melatonin, but what he says is, I personally take, I think it's 50, 60 milligrams a night. And he would say, I would feel comfortable taking, I think after the age of 45, 5 to 10 milligrams, and then every decade after that, 10 milligrams extra, 10 milligrams extra. And then doses are enormously high. But if you've got someone that has a viral condition or so on, you might even require higher levels over the winter, because you have such inflammation, oxidative stress in the body. Now, when it comes to blood testing and so on, right now, there is no practical ways of testing it. The Dutch test is the only way, but again, it comes back to symptoms. How are you feeling? How is your sleep quality? How is your wakefulness in the morning? And so on. If you want those antioxidant effects, you could look at markers that correlate to inflammation in the body, C-reactive protein, or we could even look at, HbA1c, or fasting insulin or triglycerides, and it may correlate. But again, I think the best marker so far is in the urine.
Okay. And are there any negative impacts that you can think of with somebody? Have you seen anybody take melatonin that it didn't really go well for them? I'll give you an example. I've tried experimenting with melatonin because I have a very overactive brain, and when I go to sleep, I have a hard time falling asleep, and sometimes I'll wake up and I'll stay awake for a couple hours and fall asleep again. But I tried very, very low amounts of melatonin, like 1 milligram, and then tried going to 2. And as soon as I get about 3 or so, I find it negatively impacts my sleep. I find myself, it's almost stimulating in a way, which is really odd. Have you seen people having strange side effects, or
I personally have not seen that, but I have read how some individuals, there's always some unique snowflakes out there that have paradoxical effects where when they have melatonin, they actually get a bit more jittery, almost like a caffeine effect. Now, I've never experienced that. I've never experienced that with clients, but it's not to say it doesn't happen. But what I would say as well is, what form of melatonin were you taking? Were you taking just an oral tablet? Were you taking a sustained release?
I've tried both oral and sustained release, but it was never prescription pharma grade. It was just stuff you get at the typical health food store.
Yeah, so typically I would always just go pharma grade, because with pharma grade, at least if it says 5 milligrams or 2 milligrams, it is what it says in the tin. There's not that much variation. But one thing I did get from Dr. Serrano when using melatonin is sometimes you do require an immediate release and also a combination of sustained release. If the person does have sleep quality issues, is it that they have problems going to sleep or staying asleep? So there are some capsules out there that maybe there might be some fats added or so on, or maybe even fiber or something added to it that delayed the release. Because when we look at melatonin, I believe the half-life of melatonin is only 45 minutes. So it's quite short in the body. So sometimes taking a combination can help. But a lot of people will jump to melatonin as a sleep aid, but there's things that I would probably do much quicker before I jump to melatonin. I see melatonin as more of a free radical scavenger and something to address circadian rhythms. When it comes to addressing sleep quality, that wouldn't be my go-to. That would be number 6, 7, 8 on the list.
Okay. No, but say somebody wants to take it for the antioxidant properties, and they're going to say, I'm going to take it at night because it's probably going to make me sleepy. I won't take that in the morning. But then they find themselves getting woken up by it. So that's probably, I guess I'm one of those guys that I just get weird sides from everything I've ever experimented with.
So I would just tinker with that, and I would add in a combination of immediate and sustained release. And if you still get it, well, melatonin might just not be for you. Nothing in absolutes again.
Yeah. And is there a typical dose that you're saying, people as a 40 and up should potentially supplement? Is there a recommended guideline for dose out there that, they say, you should take at least 5 milligrams or whatever it is, or again,
I would only say what I do and kind of what I recommend my family or my grandparents and so on. And for myself, I don't really take it unless I travel. And I'm going to the States or Canada. But for my grandparents, let's say my grandparents are early 80s. Okay, what's the cost benefit to taking melatonin? There's a lot of potential benefits and very few side effects. So I would go back to Russell J. Rutter's recommendations, and I would be going towards the high end. I would put, if you're over the age of 60, 70, 80, I would be pushing 30, 40 milligrams, because I think the cost benefit is very beneficial.
Basically as much as they can tolerate, I guess.
Yeah, and a bit of drowsiness for someone in their later years isn't necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes they suffer from insomnia because they've got a calcified pineal gland. Yeah,
right. Yeah, they say that as the more you age, the less sleep you wind up having. Or sometimes they say the less sleep you need. The less sleep you need part always kind of struck me as kind of strange. Maybe the less sleep you're able to achieve, but it doesn't mean that just because you're getting older and you're sleeping less hours doesn't mean that that sleeping less hours is what you need. Potentially it's just you're not able to sleep as long as you potentially would have needed to.
Yeah, and you make a good point there. Even when you are asleep, it's not about just sleeping, it's about the quality of the sleep. Are you in deep stages of sleep and so on? So melatonin can help with putting you into those deeper stages of restorative sleep. So I think that's quite beneficial as well.
Cool. Thank you very much for the info, Ron.
No problem.